What's up, guys? It is Modern Craftsman Monday. This week's episode. Let's do that again.
Dude,
no, let's just
fine.
keep rolling.
You're fine.
Yeah, that's Christian Chapman, 1,000 Year House on Instagram. Johnny, what are we naming this episode? Because
authenticity.
Just keep
yeah,
going.
we're going. We're rolling, man. No edits. No, this was a very eye-opening episode for. Well, we talk about mass wall construction, which is a great follow-up to the Fine Home Building Summit with Christine, who was talking about it. But it's also an interesting look on what history has taught us about construction in homes and how they were way more well thought out than we give them credit for.
Or today's builds.
Yeah, but it's not really a building science-y type episode.
It's not a building science
Yeah,
episode
so
at all,
people
actually.
are somewhat, some people just aren't into that. So even the mass wall is more from just like a traditional building and architecture approach.
Agreed.
I mean, this guy is driving craftsmanship and, but at an affordable rate. You guys
think
have to
of
listen.
every BYOB sweet cool restaurant that you've ever been into in the cultural section of a city, and that's what the insides of his houses look like.
Fair.
That's perfect. It's a great podcast. You guys will enjoy it.
Well, I appreciate you making time, and I know we were chatting about it last week, but the last minuteness this morning, appreciate you making time.
Mm-hmm.
So when you say you do a lot of speaking, is that just in general? He never shuts up?
Yeah, I'm a talker.
Well,
Professional.
I'll be invited to come and speak, and it's usually, some sort of little stipend or something for traveling. And the last time I spoke was at CNU. Are y'all familiar with the Congress of the New Urbanism?
No.
I am not.
Are you familiar with New Urbanism?
Nope.
Also am not.
Have you heard of Seaside?
Strike three. Fill us in.
The town Seaside in New Jersey, but that's about it.
Okay, so down in the panhandle of Florida around 1980, a young architect was commissioned by a guy who had inherited some land in an area west of Panama City. And this young architect, that was Andreas Duani, and he had been studying under Leon Creer, who is a European architect who, where's Leon from? Do you know? Luxembourg, yeah.
Well, hold up. He's got assistants? Just calling off,
I know.
confirming
Looking
stuff?
off camera. Hey,
I need that in my life.
confirm this,
Fact
please.
checker.
Yeah, my assistant. There's
That's awesome.
But anyway, Leon Creer is a really, really famous traditional architect, and he's kind of a contemporary Wrightian significance, and but he began rethinking the way we consider architecture, looking at European villages and cities, and seeing what is it that makes them so effective at fostering well-being, So and what he found out was primarily they weren't designed around the automobile, and they were. The roads between buildings were for carts and horses, and it just created this intimacy that forced people to intersect more, and it caused culture, in a way that doesn't happen. The suburbia is sort of the antithesis of this now, where everyone's kind of isolated in their own personal little universe of an acre or two, and they can pull into their garage and the door closes and no one ever even sees them. It's almost like it's a house for the car,
Yeah.
You never see people. So anyway, back to Andreas Duani. In 1980, he began a project called Seaside, where they were looking at very expensive oceanfront property. And he's saying, well, hey, let's build 800 square foot cottages and put them 10 feet apart. And everyone thought he lost his mind. You do know of this, whether you realize it or not. It was the backdrop for the Truman Show. You remember that movie with Jim Carrey?
I feel like we've talked about this development before.
Well, I think either Brett Hull talked about it. Brent Hull.
Yeah.
At his.
It was Brent.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah. Okay. I think it was at the Fine Home Building thing when we pulled them aside.
Summit, yeah.
So I think that when you said Seaside, it sounded familiar, but I didn't know where.
It's either that or I feel like Norton Commons architect is the same.
Jason Black.
Jason Black at Norton Common has a whole community designed around, I think, the same philosophy or same people, because like all the driveways and all the
garages
are in the back.
Yeah, you drive your house through the back
alleys.
Back alleys. So it's really about walking in that kind of look from the front. You don't see any garages.
Yeah, it's so with Seaside, kind of the new urbanist movement was born, and it has really flourished and has a big following. But basically, it was when kind of the split in traditional architecture where they began thinking about, stop thinking about just the individual building in terms of architecture and how you orient buildings together, how that nurtures well-being. Does that make sense?
It does, but it's funny because I remember Jason talking about how the cars would go around to the back of the house and they wanted a sense of community. Mm-hmm. And I think that, at least for me, that was never apparent to me until, that was brought up. And it mm-hmm. was like, I never really considered it a sense of well-being, right? But in the sense that, the way you're kind of explaining it, it does make sense. You can pull, nowadays you pull your car in the garage, you shut the door, you go inside, you're in your own habitat, and you leave and you do your thing. There is no sense of community. And going and speaking to the Seaside, development project, you said there are 800 square foot cottages built 10 feet apart, creating this sense of, community.
You have no choice.
Right. It's like you have to know your neighbor.
And they're pushed up close to the sidewalk. Porches are an essential part of it. You're on the porch. People are walking by the sidewalk. The intersection is kind of forced, and you have to say hello.
We went down this path because you had just spoke at an event for this. Is that right?
Yeah. So every year you have the Congress of the New Urbanism, and they hold it in different cities. This was maybe the 20-something years since that they've been doing it. And at this annual meeting, I had two presentations to make, and I was also on a panel.
So is a new urbanism designed around that same mentality? Is that what that is?
That's what that is. That's what new urbanism is.
And is that to
so
bring
I've been
these
explaining.
Good.
Say that again.
So is new urbanism basically helping facilitate these communities? Yes.
So it's a coming together of planners and architects primarily, and sharing ideas and presenting projects and hopefully generating a lot of constructive debate. And a lot of times that can get kind of playful, but I really recommend going. It's there's a lot of things to attend, and you definitely should go at least once if you're in the industry.
What is your role at these events? I obviously speaking, but are you advocating for architect, builder, developer?
So I'm advocating for building models, alternative building models with longer life cycle. I'm advocating staying power. Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's my big thing, but not just staying power, affordable staying power. So it's kind of a.
I feel like we're gonna have the same question. Go ahead.
Yeah.
No, it's like, is that like efficiencies, or is that products that will hold up longer on the outside?
Yeah, it's a structural masonry themed building model. Okay, so we're taking pre-war triple wide common bond structural masonry, which you guys have a ton of where you are, and building that new construction, but outfitting it with conventional construction techniques and products, materials.
So to quote your Instagram, this is what kind of drove us to connecting. Your description says a structural masonry revival fusing classical practices with modern tech to create affordable, multi-century life cycle alternatives to the disposable building or to disposable buildings.
Yeah, that nutshells it pretty good.
That's sexy.
That's right.
Try. That was even better.
I like the subtleness to that.
Yeah, it was so clean.
So, what are you a mason by trade?
I'm the lead mason on all my personal projects.
And what are the projects? So we've already went down this rabbit hole, but I haven't even asked kind of what you do on a day to day. Do you own a masonry company? Are you a developer builder? There's a lot. I mean, there's a ton of fantastic projects on here. And what is your role? Some of the developments, some of the buildings, things like that.
Okay, I'm constantly trying to figure out the best formula for building a lasting architecture that is as cost effective as possible. So for a long time I did pretty high end 1%er stuff that was elaborate,
mm-hmm.
and then I started. I wanted to be able to afford to buy my own work, which I couldn't doing that stuff. So I wanted to come up with a
preach.
I wanted to come up with some way of building this way that I could also acquire, that was accessible to regular folks like me. So lately, the past two and a half years, I've been pretty immersed in a pocket neighborhood that I've subdeveloped. So I'm in a new urbanist community called Carlton Landing in the heart of the Midwest. I'm in on a large 150 square mile lake in Oklahoma. So in very ultra rural, what these guys did, they looked at Oklahoma City, Tulsa, and Dallas and said, when these guys want to get away, where do they have to go? And they had to drive all the way to the Gulf to get away. And so, but in between all of this, and right in the middle of all this is this inland sea. I mean, it's a big lake, and so they decided to buy 1,600 acres and do kind of a Midwest version of Seaside here. And right now we're about 250 homes into a 20-year build out.
This is Norton Commons all day. I texted Jason, but he hasn't gotten back to me. Oh, he did. Yeah. He did. Yes, same land planner from Miami. So it is right. Norton Commons.
Oh, that's DPZ. Ask him if it's DPZ.
He did. He said DPZ.
Okay, right. Yeah. So DPZ, that's Andreas Duani who built that town development I was telling you about.
This all sounds familiar because I'm jealous of both of your developments now, Jason and yours.
Yeah. It's pretty amazing. It really is.
Is it similar? So Jason, obviously, he's not developing or touching every single home in this project, and you're helping subdevelop. So is it a similar setup? And I'm not sure if you're familiar with Jason, but is it similar where you're buying plots of land and developing one at a time, or is your involvement larger than that, where you're kind of overseeing the entire architecture throughout all 200 of these homes?
No, I'm one of half a dozen approved builders here. So we have like a builders guild here,
Mm-hmm.
But basically, we did a field test for this idea in Columbus, Georgia in like 2011 or 2012. And I started blogging about it and got a lot of response on social media. And then a friend of mine who introduced me at that point to New Urbanism, he basically said, you're on this trajectory all by yourself. And just a little ways over here, there's a parallel trajectory with all of this support. If I could just nudge you over to the New Urbanism. you would just have a lot of backing, and so that's what happened, and it just kind of blew up. Well, they had already started Carlton Landing. Of course, I knew nothing about New Urbanism or Carlton Landing at the time, but the developer, town founder, because this has actually become the youngest town in Oklahoma. So we're due to get our own post office and zip code at some point, But he reached out to me and said, and invited me to relocate there. So they imported me from Atlanta, where I was initiating. So we did a field test in Columbus, Georgia, which is fairly rural. I got some blowback that, you could never do that sort of thing in the city. And then I was invited to come to Oklahoma to another rural location. Mm-hmm. And I realized, and I knew that once I got to Oklahoma, that was going to be kind of my petri dish for really experimenting and I knew I was going to be hunkered down there for a while. And I got a proposition to build another project just outside of Atlanta, an urban infill project that I didn't particularly want to take. I wanted to get to Oklahoma, but I realized it was very important for me to demonstrate that I could build this way in an urban environment where there was a conservative building department following a strict energy code. And so that was the main motivation for doing that project. Turned out to be a great project. It's took about 3 months to put together a 90-page permit submittal. Yeah. So, but once that was done, we had the playbook for how to build in that municipality. So with Mass Wall. So,
can I pause you for 1 second?
Sure.
Real quick, your mic on your headphone.
Yeah, is it bumping or something?
It's bumping off the collar, so we get a almost like a paper rubbing sound.
All right.
So, just for obviously everyone's benefit. Perfect.
Like I said,
I try.
So when you're building these homes, or you say that you're a builder, are you GCing these jobs, or are you just taking the masonry for them? What's your role in that?
Man, I wish there was a way for me to insert images into this conversation.
I was just actually looking through your whole Instagram right now. Mm-hmm. But I feel like I got hung up on a lot of the actual videos of you laying brick.
Right.
Which is
so I'm pretty involved with the masonry. I'm instructing. I'm really. I've gotten to a point where I'm trying to discipline myself to delegate more. And pull back on the extreme ownership.
How's that going?
Not well.
Same.
But I'm progressing. But yeah, until we went to scale in August of 2017, and so we arrived in Oklahoma November of 2015 or 2014. 2014, yeah, and at that point, we had 2 projects behind us. Each of them took a year to do, because we're in R&D and we're determining best practices, right? And the first 2 years at Carlton Landing, again, we did 1 project a year, still fleshing out the best practices. In August of 2017, we went to scale, and what I mean by that was I understood the answers to the right questions well enough to where I could bring in subcontractors like a big masonry crew with maybe 5 or 6 masons and as many laborers, and I wouldn't be stumbling around guiding them. I knew exactly what to do at that point. So once that happened, we production was boosted 300%. So we went from doing 1 house a year to a house every 4 months, basically. And we've maintained that over the last 3 years. One of those was actually a chapel for a monastery that we did back in Atlanta, 800 miles away. So even with that curve, we've still maintained that 1 project for every 4 months. So, but basically, when masonry massing is completed, it looks like a ruin, like something you would see, you know, when you see freestanding masonry and no wood involved, it's all rotted away or whatever. So it looks like that. And at that point, we begin integrating convention. We just begin, and that's actually one of the larger hurdles, is attaching stick framing to that masonry in a fairly seamless way. So that was as much of a challenge as learning how to be really productive with the masonry in a timely fashion, you know.
So a couple of kind of quick fire questions that come to mind. How many square feet on average are these places?
Okay, so my pocket neighborhood, again, we're exploring, trying to figure out that the sweet spot, but and also, and this is also another part of, I'm going to get on a lot of tangents here. Pardon my sidebar.
Love it.
But a big part of new urbanism is community. You know, as we've said, well, to have community, you have to have a fair amount of diversity intermixed. You know, so if you have a town that artists and teachers can't afford to live in, you're not going to have that critical, those critical ingredients that you need that make it spark, you know. So I decided to try to build some really small cottages. I've got 5 800 square foot cottages and 3 about 1,300 square foot. They're in a horseshoe, 5 feet apart at the pinch point, and it's with a common area in the middle of the horseshoe and parking, and all of that is happening on 1/3 of an acre.
Wow.
Yeah.
So,
and there's lots of examples of that on Instagram.
To piggyback off Tyler's question, were you doing one of those 800 square foot homes a year when you started in your R&D?
No. So when we went to scale with this project, with this pocket neighborhood. So up until that, you know, the house we did before that was about 1,400 square foot here in Oklahoma. And the first house we did in Oklahoma was about 2,300 square feet, you know, which is pretty common. 2,300 square feet in this community is a really big house.
Okay.
What's a 2,300 square foot house like your building sell for there?
It's going to be in the $300 a foot range. That includes lot.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. That changed everything.
That's a big difference, yeah.
Yeah.
So, sorry, Tyler, I'm interrupting, but early on, going back to your, you know, the struggles of R&D and kind of preparing yourself for, you know, kind of take off with this, you know, you mentioned one of the biggest hurdles was attaching stick framing to, you know, these mass masonry walls.
Right.
And I mean, am I wrong in thinking that if you're building a mass masonry building, it's going to be exposed brick on the exterior, or is that optional in this case?
On the interior, you mean?
Exterior. It's always going to be exposed brick on the exterior, correct? You're not You're not cladding it.
Right. So So as far as the envelope is concerned, it's exposed brick on the interior and the exterior.
So the difficult part of attaching timber is the floor joist, the roof line, things like that.
Yeah, I mean, that was part of our discovery process. What we landed on, you know, you can begin as you're approaching a ceiling height, you know, you can begin corbelling out a ledger.
Mm-hmm.
And so we just developed a process, and we also realized that it's important to put those floor systems in as you're coming up with the masonry. Like, we don't complete the masonry structure and then come back and retrofit that stuff. It's much easier to do it as you come to those things, and it just postpones the masonry for a day or two, and then you keep going, and you're able to use those floor systems for scaffolding, and it's a safer process as well.
I know this question is going to lead us down a rabbit hole, but we just completed a project, and it was a mass masonry wall. Newton. Our Newton project. And we opened up the walls only to find that we had a 1-inch air gap between plaster and brick. And the question arose that I've never dealt with that before. And we spoke to, you know, multiple professionals that have worked with that, and the biggest thing was that there's no insulation. But mass masonry wall or mass wall construction in general has a much better R value. So is that a big reason, as you know, was that a big reason going that route, is to, you know, reduce or eliminate the need for, you know, whether it's bat insulation or things like that? You're building a really thermal, I mean,
stable, I would say.
Stable
at that point,
wall.
like thermally stable.
Well, energy wasn't a big driver. You know, I was looking at the textile mills and warehouses in the city that had been converted into loft apartments,
mm-hmm.
and into coffee shops and boutique restaurants, and you know what I mean. And you walk into these buildings, and there's something that's very captivating about those surfaces. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Do you guys experience that? Do you understand what I'm saying?
Well, you know how they're built, so they tell a story.
Exactly. And the thing that strikes me most about them is how authentic they are. You know, that they're how cosmetically unaware they are, and that when they were built, that was simply the way you built a wall.
Function.
You know, if you needed a utility wall, you didn't have concrete blocks. You know, that this was simply just the easiest way to build a wall that would last. And so they weren't very fastidious. You know, they weren't very concerned about, you know, if they happen to break bond on a course or stack bond, it didn't matter, you know, because there's so much mass there, it can afford those discrepancies. You know what I mean?
Right.
So, and there was just a nice, playful carelessness that you just don't see anywhere anymore, you know, that goes, and there's such a vacuum in America right now for authenticity that's why I believe that people latch onto this. You know, you just can't build enough, you can't remodel enough warehouses. It doesn't seem like they all just kind of fly off the shelf. So,
I mean, I think I'm looking at the window behind you, right? And that's a square window, but they curve that top because rather than having this flat, you know, whether you let in a piece of granite or
instead of having a lintel, that is structurally sound.
That curve, right.
So back in the day, you know, when you didn't have, you know, when all you had was muscle power, whether it was men or horses or whatever, you know, to hoist up a granite lintel was tough work. Mm. You definitely wouldn't have used steel or you would have used cast iron maybe, but that wouldn't have been very cost effective compared to just building an arch. You know, the amount of energy that goes into that is surprisingly low. I mean, and especially, you know, the way that so there's a window buck there. You know, you get to the height of the windowsill right here, and you stand a window buck up there that's going to end up being the substrate for attaching the window, you know. And well, we went ahead and began attaching the form to the top of that window buck. So when we stood that up and braced it off and plumbed it, and the masons are able to keep laying brick on the line without picking up a level, they're able to create that opening. And when they get to the arch, you know, it's another 30 minutes, 45 minutes to build an arch over that window. And meanwhile, the form is insulated with foam on the inside. It's already outfitted to stay there. And as soon as they get over it, it's ready to receive a stock size window, you know? So,
so how were you able to take this construction that is less, you know, common today and bring it back to a point where you are also driving affordability? Because I want to come to a question that you brought up earlier, is you went from working for the 1%ers to realizing that you want to be able to afford your own work. Because this is something that I internally ask all the time, is that we all want to build these amazing homes and spend a ton of money and have clients that just want to spend the money and build something crazy. But at the same time, there's this huge market that, you know, we're not touching. We're looking at higher dollar value and crazier things, where why not take your approach and say, let's make this more affordable, and let's do the research to figure out how to do it and provide a great product. And I assume the space you're sitting in is new, right? This isn't an old building.
Yeah, we moved in about a year ago.
Right. I mean, that place, you look like you're in an old mill building, and
Right.
and you said it too, is that people are dying for authenticity.
Right.
So going back to my first question, I'm sorry, I asked too, how did you take this type of construction and do the research to make this an affordable way to build in a market that is driving, a lower cost?
Well, we used to live in Decatur, just outside of Atlanta, before we moved to Oklahoma. And like I said, I was doing pretty expensive work, and I had been for a few years bringing home leftover brick, right? Just salvage brick, bringing them home. It didn't matter if they didn't match, just if they were kind of in the red family and the earthy tone family, I just brought it.
Yeah, that'll do.
And I started building this little garden studio in my backyard, right? And it was just so simple relative to what I had been doing, And when I finished it, I just kind of stepped back and I looked at it, and I just wondered how many of my friends wouldn't want to live in a house built just like this. And I was struck by how affordable that would be. If I was able to distill design in a house the way I had done with this little shop space, this could turn into something. So planets kind of aligned, and within, I guess, 4 to 6 months of this initial light bulb idea, we were in Columbus, Georgia, breaking ground on the first project.
Wow.
And yeah, that got us off and running. We did a thermal mass study with Clemson University on that project. So I just remembered that. So let's come back to that at some point. Don't let me forget to talk about that a little bit. But does that answer your question? How I went from doing the high stuff to...
It does, but I guess what I'm still...
There's another story about how I went from building horse stables to high-end stuff.
Well, I guess what did you have to compromise to be able to build to that quality at an affordable thing? That's what I think we all struggle with.
That's a nice question. I had to compromise on my ego to express myself.
Wow.
Okay. Not where we thought that was going.
No, I like it.
So my background's in fine arts, and I studied sculpting and painting, and discovered building while I was in school, and knew that I was going to be a builder. But before I finished school, I went ahead and finished school. But so I don't have any academic background in building or architecture. I lean completely on just the fine arts, But so I was just kind of rethinking brick as pixels, kind of just another sculpting medium, So and because I didn't grow up in a family that I didn't come up through the traditional ranks of becoming a mason, So I had a pretty fresh take on it, And I just wanted to sculpt with brick, and did really, really elaborate things, often at my own financial peril, But
so, do you think with the fine arts background, when you made the shift from being the lead mason and then hiring a masonry crew, that's where that compromise was made? Is that when you were laying brick, it was done to a certain standard, and when you started hiring people, you had to step back?
No, because the people that I hire can still, they can still execute, 90% of what I can do. You know, so it's just a matter of I have to design more simply, you know, because and I'm convinced that a simple, honest building is much better than an elaborate house with 12 unnecessary gables and
Yeah.
you know what I'm saying? So
but is it more expensive to build authentically with those details than it is to put on those 3 extra dormers that mean nothing on the outside of a building?
well, I mean, I'm competing with the people around me right now.
Right.
You know, I'm in the same neighborhood as the stick framing going on around me right now. So this is very much an upper middle class market, which is necessary for any innovation. You know, you don't start out at your best price. You have to start out at a price point where it's going to allow you to grow and get better and become more cost effective. But yeah, you know, when we lay, so our envelope wall is a nominal 12 inches thick. It's 3 brick thick. Okay. And when we lay a cubic foot of brick, we really don't come back to it. Right. So consider that. Consider the 8 to 10 steps involved with a conventional envelope wall section.
Right.
And that we're replacing that with 1 step.
Right.
And take into account that that's 8 to 10 times the liability, 8 to 10 times the logistics problems, 8 to 10 times the material getting delivered to the wrong site, so someone not showing up for work, someone getting hurt. You know what I'm saying? And
you break it down into everyone that touches that, you know, matching cubic foot.
Yeah, yeah,
and framing it, sheathing it, taping it. You know.
Then consider just the carbon footprint of the travel of all of those people, you know, that are coming to that job, and the carbon footprint of all of those different products compared to the carbon footprint of brick, which is a lot, but when it lasts 10 times longer, that dilutes it quite a bit, you know.
So to speak to the science a little bit, I know Christine from Building Science Fight Club, she had mentioned, I think, in one of her seminars that, you know, with tradition, you know, what I'm calling traditional stick framing, you're basically managing water. You have to, you know, create drainage planes. You need to make sure these details are allowing water to escape, where mass wall construction, it's designed to take on water and then dry out, and take on water
Right.
and dry out. It's very simple. So I even think of that. I mean, you mentioned liability. There's the liability. The liability is in all those steps that it takes to manage water, and it only takes 1 for you to have a potential catastrophic failure. Where in mass construction, I mean, when she had said that out loud, that's what spiked my interest in the mass. When I started realizing what you do, that's what really wanted me to get, you know, obviously this conversation going. But that's
so. Was she saying that one mistake along any of those number of steps can cause catastrophic failure versus that is fairly forgiving?
Right. So
yeah.
So
I haven't heard that argument. I like that. I think that's pretty accurate.
You should.
Yeah, I mean, mass wall construction.
It's definitely leaning your way.
As far as the science behind it, are there, you know, in today's world and in today's, you know, what you're building, are there any additional steps that you are doing? Like, are you doing masonry sealers on the exterior? What is your inside cavity? Is it always exposed brick? Are you, adding strapping? You know, what is the science behind that wall beyond just being 3-wide brick?
So I would really like to see more eaves than what we've used on these smaller houses. We are using a thorough seal product, a clear thorough seal product on some of these houses, just because there's 0 eave.
Yep,
we're looking at it,
and that's working really well. You know,
and that's a one-time sealer.
I want to say it has like a 7-year lifespan, but with
I mean,
that's with just veneer. You add 3 brick thick to that, and I think it can go a longer way.
I mean, 7 years you're painting your house pretty much the same, and that's a lot more
Right.
forgiving than painting.
Right. And it's a really easy application, much easier than painting.
Right. What's the inside? What does the interior of the home typically look like?
As far as the brick?
Yeah, most of the time you're leaving the exposed brick, or?
Yeah. Now, on a few of our smaller ones, we painted them white just to kind of open it up a little bit, But before it gets dark, I can walk you around this room and you can kind of see.
Are you running all electrical conduit and like all your plumbing exposed as well?
Yeah, so you can see.
Yeah.
God, it looks so good though in conduit.
Yeah. We call it a residustrial,
Didn't somebody just say?
Resumer-
Oh, no, that was Resumercial.
Resumercial was the last podcast.
So this is our Morceau wood stove. That's another member of the family.
It sucks.
How cold's it get there?
It's not too bad. We have the occasional snow, but
That's so cool looking.
yeah.
Everyone on the podcast is like, I can't see this, guys.
But they gotta go to his social media.
Basically, it looks like every remodeled commercial space that I've been into in Philly that took an old building and tore all the plaster off and exposed the brick.
Mm-hmm.
Not in a bad way. It looks like it's been there for a very long time.
Yeah, I'm really fond of the live joint where you're not really tooling the joint, you're just trowel cutting the mortar. And
well, it's because the thought was it was going to get covered up, so why spend the time tooling it?
Exactly.
And then
Actually, and leaving that tooth that comes with just a trowel cut mortar joint gives something for that plaster to grab onto,
Yeah.
So
I'm extremely jealous right now.
We're really proud of this. Is the first house I've ever built that I've lived in, by the way.
Congrats.
And when we moved in a year ago, I was actually a little ambivalent about how I was going to feel about living in the house that I built because where everything's not exactly right.
It's the worst.
And I was wondering how I was going to cope with that. And man, I got in here and it's just like living in art. We would wake up and it just water off a duck's back. It was wonderful. It's just been incredible living in it. Yeah.
What has been the response in where you're competing? I mean, against the guy that's stick framing. No offense to him, but
right. So the people that are into what we're doing are all in,
mm-hmm.
and it's not for everybody, but for the people that it speaks to. I mean, it speaks loudly, and it speaks to enough. So, but yeah, I mean, there a lot of people when we first came here were kind of scratching their heads a little bit. What are those guys doing? So.
John, I even wonder, there's so many people in Boston, right, that we do renovations in these loft buildings and these brick buildings. They're ripping exposed brick. You do a brownstone, they're like, I want to leave the exposed brick. And there's, I think of our Newton job. If they were up for it, imagine if we stripped the interior of that home and made it. I mean, I've certainly never seen it done new. And the areas that are being renovated are old buildings.
But to speak to that, if it was done today new, like Jason's doing, he's building a stick frame house, wrapping it with zip, and then putting brick on a shelf on the foundation and going up.
Right.
This is all in one. I'm thinking about it. We have a design right now for a main house being a colonial with the main box being brick, and I'm like, oh, I should do this.
Right.
I should so do this.
Where do you get all the brick from?
Oh, there's any number of places.
It's all extra from his past project.
It's a guy
collecting it.
Tore down the old shed.
So the house that you're seeing that I'm in now is that came out of North Tulsa, and this is a salvage brick. These are 100-plus-year-old brick that are really well made. And but our smaller 800 square foot cottages we actually built with off-market king brick which I'm really not a fan of. But I found all of this product and that saw a lot of embodied energy there that needed to be put to use. And we kind of adapted the model to where we could use that. And it's worked out really well, so all different kinds of brick, but preferably just a modular brick. Sometimes these are all solid bricks. Sometimes we'll use cord brick, sometimes we'll use frog brick. Have you guys heard of Old Virginia Brick Company that recently closed its doors? It was a 100-plus-year-old company that provided the brick for our first project here and for the one that we did in Atlanta. That was a frogged brick. It just kind of had a concave bottom to it. Yep. No holes that went all the way through, just a concave area that sat on the bed joint. So
it's really dependent on the job.
We get really creative with sourcing brick. Let's just put it that way.
You made the reference earlier about carbon footprint, and that was interesting to me because that was actually a question I had about brick, is the manufacturing process and what that does, because environmental and building green and is it healthy to produce? Is it healthy to work with? Do silica, the silica laws, things like that, all of the negative sides to it. And I know, and you came in with the argument that it lasts longer. So realistically, the carbon footprint is kind of offset by the longevity of it.
Right.
Have you went the route of doing a study on what a traditional stick frame carbon footprint, would be versus a mass wall?
I haven't. But I'm. We're not speculating when we say that a building like this can last 600, 700 years.
No, there's tens of thousands of buildings proving.
There's evidence.
Sure. So I haven't done the actual study, but it stands to reason that, yes, if the carbon footprint is high for a standard life cycle, say it's twice as high as a typical build, but it lasts 10 times longer. Say it's 3 times as high, it would last 10 times longer. There's a delta there that's in our favor. So
is that part of the selling factor too? Selling a home like this, that the price point is going to be higher, but the longevity is there. So I guess pairing that is your ideal client someone that is buying this home for longevity?
It's gonna live to be 700 years old.
Yeah.
Your customer?
I think the ideal client has a conscience in that regard. And sometimes not. Sometimes it's just cool. Sometimes it's just a cool house, and they get that, and they love that element of it. But we do have the client that feels convicted about the stewardship and just the conservation aspects of buildings that last much longer. If you really, if we consider, and I believe this is a pretty reasonable statement, that somewhere between my grandchildren and their grandchildren, almost everything is going to have to be rebuilt.
Yeah.
And when that, that's a Herculean task in and of itself. But add to that when that happens, there's going to be many more people on the planet. The world's going to be a much more complicated place, and there's going to be substantially fewer resources. So let's just tack that on to that as well. So, and to be really honest about what motivated me to launch into this, it happened at the same time I was having children, and I was kind of looking at what was I doing to make their world better, and I don't, I don't particularly want my kids to have it better than me, but I definitely want them to be better than me. So I'm trying to create a world where that can happen. So add up.
I dig it.
Yeah.
I mean,
what the houses that are getting built and stick framed around in your neighborhood? So if those like 2,300 square foot houses or something with land are selling for around $700,000.
Mm-hmm.
So what
In that range.
so like if somebody's coming in, are they just getting more square footage on these other houses? Like, are your houses smaller?
Typically,
for
it's
that
going to be a little
price
bit
point?
smaller, and it's going to be higher quality. There's going to be something there that's not getting satisfied by the other houses.
There's the formula.
Yeah.
so it really isn't, I guess when I originally heard you say affordability, it wasn't affordability comparing to the other homes in the neighborhood. It was building for a more affordable market for your product.
No, I want it to be financially accessible for everyone.
Understood,
when I
but
say
you're not competing against the guy that might be stick building for a lesser quality. Like you're not going in it saying, all right, I need to, if he's selling that for $500, I need to be $499.
I don't think he's comparing himself to those guys. I feel like his affordability is just his product, and the price point of what he's putting on the market is an affordable product in his mind.
That's what I mean. I guess that's what I'm trying to clarify.
Yeah.
If we're adhering to a value that's based on square footage, what you're saying might actually be accurate. But but if I'm looking at a family of 5 like my own, and they're in Carlton Landing, and they're looking at a 3,000 square foot house versus a 2,500 square foot house that I build, that's the same price. That might be something that might be getting at what you're talking about. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean you're looking at it as you need to be competitive to the market, but offer a better product.
To really create a paradigm shift, it's hard to say to the market, this is great and it's only 15% more. You really need to say this is great and it costs the same.
Right.
Yeah, you need to show value.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's what I mean. We do a lot of custom stuff. We also do spec, and we take the same. The only reason why we're in the spec market is to be able to show people what the same. Let's say it's $1 million to build their houses. The same spec guy that's 2 houses down has the exact same amount of money as me. How I use that money, where maybe I don't drench it with wainscoting or moldings and all this stuff that makes you trick you into making it feel custom and layer it with all this meaningless stuff. We just put in authentic openings where if we put in, like we're doing a Greek revival right now, where the windows on the first floor are going to be 8 feet tall, where you can't fake that. When someone walks in and you walk up to the house and you get that dramatic feel of those headers at 8 feet and they drop to the floor, like people can't figure out why it's so much cooler than the house next door that has a 5'8" window and it's stock. And it's that authentic detail that in an old Greek revival, this is what they had. And we're just copying. Someone already made the playbook.
Right.
Everyone's ignoring it and trying to recreate it when we can just work that into our plans.
Sure.
Yeah, but all your windows are tempered now.
Yeah. True, but
it's a big difference.
No, my point is like our client asked us like, hey, they didn't know. They were like, so this is a Greek revival. They started looking into it. And I was like, you know what I'll do? I mean, this should go to the floor. And they're like, you think so? I'm like, don't hear it from me. Let me go drive through Holliston. Let me drive through Sherborne. Let me find these houses that have the placards on them that say like 1726. And all these windows drop to the floor. So I'm taking photos of not other spec houses, but I'm taking photos of historic houses that fit the same parameters that we're building to. And they're like, yeah, we'll spend the extra $15,000, whatever it is. Like we're on board. Like we love that detail. Like,
right.
and I love that this is your model. Like I'm doing it on one little piece. I try and take a chunk or two into it, but your whole structure starts there.
Right. Yeah, it's and And I like to think of, the brick is so overwhelmingly authentic that when we bring in other manufactured products to accommodate the comfort and convenience and the economy of our age, that those are just overwhelmed by the reality of the brick. That it's a wall that it's not pretending to be something it's not.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that kind of a mantra, that I really work hard to authenticate. A lot of people think that they when they see something old, they think they like it because it's old, and they don't realize that they actually like it because it was made in such a way that it could one day be old.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a big difference in that. If you think that it's simply because it's old, then you can just make something look old.
Right.
And that'll sort of work. It'll sort of like, yeah, I know that. They'll do the math in their head. They'll say, well, I know I like old things and this looks old, so I'm supposed to like it, so I'll pay extra for it. But they're not, but for whatever reason, they're not getting what they're hoping for, when they live in it, so, yeah.
Is all your heating and cooling forced air? Do you have spiral ductwork?
Well, on these small these small cottages that we're doing, it's all mini splits, ductless mini splits. That's working out pretty well.
So that goes back to
what have you said you've been there for like a full year?
Yeah.
What is your, I don't know if you have perspective as far as utility with the building envelope that you have, but are your utility bills, would you say, more than you anticipated, less, kind of hitting the mark?
I need to actually look at them, but I will say I have 3 kids, and they just have the doors open all the time. So,
I'm not heating the whole neighborhood.
So my house, I think my house was built in 1890 something. It's an old farmhouse, and when we demoed some of the rooms, we found brick in all of the wood frame cavities. So we have a structural clapboard sheathing on the outside. And then there's no actual sheathing or, there's no 1x or anything creating shear, but then they have some lead in braces, but then all of the cavities were brick, which I'm sure a lot of people said it was for air blockage because of the clapboard, but I'm also sure it's thermal mass.
So it was infill between the studs?
Yeah, so all the studs have full brick and mortar in between them.
Wow.
Which I hadn't seen.
I've not heard of that. I've not heard of that.
Yeah. He was a mason. It's all his scraps.
But I'm thinking to myself, that's got to be so much work by today's standards for insulation and air sealing and all that stuff. But the way that you're explaining putting up these walls and even with the arches and everything else, I guess if that's what people did, they were probably pretty efficient at getting that done. I'm just thinking, it took me how long to put rock wool in those walls versus fill the cavities with brick. And I just feel like my house is breathing because it just took a lot of weight out of there.
Right.
But I was curious, as far as I know that my house was never built for energy efficiency, but what a wall like yours is compared to something that's more traditionally built, or not traditionally, but by today's standards.
So it's thermal mass. It's not really about R value. It's about U value. And, it's dependent on diurnal swing. So it's going to, in the summer, the wall's going to heat up and the heat's going to begin penetrating the walls, but it has 12 inches to go, right? Mm-hmm. And before it gets too deeply into the wall, you want the sun to go down and the temperature to go down, and for that to begin retreating. So that's called diurnal swing. And it works best in the Southwest because the nights are so cool relative to the heat in the day. But that's not to say that it doesn't work well in other regions. It just works best in the Southwestern. Mm-hmm. As far as the United States goes, it works best in those areas. But we did like I mentioned before, a 3-week-long thermal mass study with Clemson. The National Brick Research Center came down. They attached thermocouples to the walls, to a south-facing wall, and monitored the migration of heat through the wall for 3 weeks. Okay, and what we found, which I felt like was pretty phenomenal, because most of the energy models tell us that thermal mass shouldn't work that well, but it's an R-biased industry, and there's really no reason for them to do much thermal mass study because not a lot of people do it. But what turned out to be the case was there were 40-degree temperature swings on the surface of the exterior surface where the thermocouple there was measuring temperatures. On the interior, there were 3 to 4 degree swings around 70 degrees. So it was getting in the 100-degree range on the exterior and staying in the 70-degree range on the interior.
That's cool.
Yeah. So that was
throw some pipes in there. Forget about geothermal.
Yeah.
Right.
Choose that.
Right.
How bad is your cell phone service inside your house?
Well, hey, we're in one. We're working on. This isn't a great Wi-Fi, and we haven't had any stutters here, so I'm actually pretty.
He's on a
pretty
landline.
impressed.
So, no, one of my old house that I brought, one of the houses, the second house that I lived in growing up had really thick brick walls. And I mean, that was years ago, but you used to have to go outside to be able to make a phone call.
Right. Yeah.
That's not a bad thing.
You guys have a lot of
Just saying.
a lot of brick up there. You have a wonderful brick tradition.
With the consideration of thermal mass and heating and cooling, so I'm thinking about or the opposite, right? In our cold winters,
Colder is more difficult than the heat.
Right. So it's 10 degrees during the day and -10 at night. I mean, there's never a chance for that brick to really gain any mass unless you're heating the inside.
Exactly.
Maybe.
I can't hear you.
Sorry, maybe the south facing side.
Right.
That might get some thermal.
So I think, all I keep picturing back is all these brownstones in Boston.
Yeah.
They're all built this way. And what the consideration was back then, right? And obviously these,
Well, they didn't have a lot of options,
Plus,
right?
their exposure is only on two sides.
Two sides, right. But it still, I guess that's what my challenge is, what is, to Tyler's point, what's that cost to keep these things warm, right? And I see them now, I've seen people spray foam them, which we should not do. And then there's also the cavity insulation. But, what are the right ways to go about that? And we don't have to get down the building science route.
Well, it's funny. I think it's not so much to get it warm, but once you get it warm, will it stay warm? Will it stay warm?
Because if you have driving, say it's windy out, it's 0 degrees, and it's trying to push that cold through that brick, and that brick's going to be cold.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
what did you guys end up doing on your job, Nick?
We did not.
Nothing?
No insulation. Yeah. Most of the plaster did not say. We added a vapor retarder with Sega, but that was it. No insulation at all.
And how's it working
Better
out?
hope that your customer's not listening, because I don't think you credit them for that insulation.
Why is it? I was thinking the same thing.
No,
I was so thinking that.
He's like, yes, we had insulation in the budget.
We spent that insulation budget on the addition. The house.
But to talk a little bit about the science, with that urban infill project that we did in Atlanta before we came to Oklahoma, in order to meet compliance, we had to do a performance-based res check, where we essentially there was a 2x10 rafter envelope, and we just filled it, and that was enough to get us. That was kind of my immediate go-to on, okay, how are we going to offset the R that's not happening in the walls?
By super insulating the roof. And also what we discovered too in this was there was a clause in the code for mass wall that, so in that area of Georgia, that region, there was an R13 required. But if you had mass wall, only an R5 was required. So
all we had to do was show an R5 in that mass wall, and we were able to get that by leaving the collar joints of the brick open, and that those thermal breaks got us over the hump. So in a triple wide wall, you're going to have 2 collar joints between there's going to be a space on both sides of that middle brick, and that's how we were able to.
So the air gap was actually achieving that R5.
I don't know if you can see that. That's my bathroom. There's an addition off the back of the house that was already pulled out, but that's like the old
that is
studs
nuts,
with the brick
man.
inside of it.
I love the ambition of the time, because just fill it up,
I guess so.
Brick is not very good at insulating. It is very good at sealing, though, and sealing is half the battle.
So that's
I think that a lot of people were saying that it was for air sealing, just because the clapboard is basically structural at that point. There's gaps. You're not caulking that. And then to keep the air, it's an old farmhouse, so there were no houses around here at that point. And like even now with it being built up, the wind just comes through here.
Right.
So I'm sure a lot of that was to prevent air coming in through the clapboard and then getting into the house.
The interesting thing about the way masonry seals, though, it's more like it doesn't seal like a Ziploc. You know what I mean? It doesn't smother the house. It's almost like it's almost skin-like. It's almost kind of a Gore-Tex of building. There is this breathing nature to it because it's not condensating. But to give you an example of how well it seals, the project that we did in Atlanta, there was a couple of large fireplaces with 16 by 20 inch blue tiles. And when they came to do the blower door test, I wasn't there. And the homeowner forgot to close the dampers. And we passed.
Wow.
So
what is passing? What was passing there? 3 ACH?
Well, just whatever the blower door test allowances were, we were within those allowances, despite a 16 by 20 flue being open.
It's interesting because that's one of the things. Going back to our Newton project, the reason we did not insulate the walls because we didn't want to lose any additional space. A lot of the home was existing. We weren't reducing room size, so we didn't have the opportunity to shrink space and add cavity insulation. So when that came up, we started chatting about air sealing, and we said, well, in the addition, we're going to insulate at the highest level we can. In the entire home, let's take the opportunity and air seal the entire house. So we did an initial blower door test, and we were expecting the house to be super leaky. And with our addition insulated, the new addition insulated, which was a traditional cavity wood construction wall, the house tested at a 6 ACH, which is far better than any of us expected for a 1930s structural brick wall. And we were able to get it down to a 1.2 once we air sealed it. And the thought there was, if we can air seal, we're helping prevent any hot air from escaping the home, now that we don't have this thermal blanket on the home.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Is that something, is air sealing something that you guys are dealing with in the homes that you're building now in Oklahoma?
Well, it's a big deal because wherever you have varying materials meeting, that's where they're likely to leak, right? And a masonry surface is so varied. It's not a very consistent surface. It's undulating. It's hard to seal against, right? So going back to the window bucks that I was telling you about earlier, so we will rabbet an edge of this 2x window buck, the edge that's coming in contact with the brick, and we'll use an ice and water shield membrane that is between the actual. We've been using wood, and we're going to switch to like a 2x Tyvek, which I'm really excited about actually. But But up till now, we've been using a like a 2x6, ripping it down to 4 5/8. So it's simulating a 2x4 wall with drywall and sheathing on it for the window. And then the interior and exterior corners of that 2x that are in contact with the brick, we will rabbet like a 1/4 by 3/8 inch deep cut there. And that is a caulking trough, you know, to where you can really get a gasket-like seal, and it's on both sides, so you have a fail-safe. I should probably go into
both
a little more
sides as
detail.
far as inside, outside, you're saying.
Right, exactly. So when we stand these bucks up, there's carriage bolts outrigging into the space that's going to be the wall, right?
That get
and then we
brick.
Yeah, and so then the wall comes up and we grout around those carriage bolts. After it cures, then we cinch those tight, and they're countersunk on the window side of that, so it's just not in the way of the rough opening. And but yeah, so that's cinching that tight against the brick. It's not going to move. It's held with 1/2-inch carriage bolts that are 10 inches long, really reaching into that masonry, and then we come in and caulk that really thoroughly and trim over it so the caulk's not even exposed, right? And that's the way we're able to achieve that seal. We've gone to a great deal of trouble to really work out how not to have infiltration.
You said you are using wood now, but you're going to switch. Did you mean to say AZEK, like a PVC?
We're using PVC on our trims inside and out.
Okay.
But no, like a I said Tyvek. I didn't mean Tyvek. I meant like a Trex.
Okay.
A Trex material.
And is the concern, are you getting water infiltration that could potentially make that window buck fail?
No. It's just that it's just treated wood, and Trex is not. You know, Trex is not wood. So it's this is an example of how we're being pretty open-minded to what technology can bring to the table.
Right.
You know, most of the time when you have someone who is feels so strongly about building traditionally and authentically as we are with brick, they're almost wearing a kilt. You can't convince them to do anything modern, you know. We're trying to take the best of the old, fuse it with the best of the new to come up with the best solution for a lasting built environment.
Do you think you'd have issues on your interior trim if you were to use wood?
Issues.
I mean, like, you're using PVC on the inside right now. Do you think that that's necessary?
It's just a fail-safe, you know. It's just like I don't have to worry about it, and I'm not concerned about authenticity there because, you know, wood doesn't have a monopoly on cuboidal shapes. You know, it's not like that. It's not like the PVC is pretending to be wood. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yeah, the only issue I've ever had is just PVC isn't very stable on the interior. So I feel like, you know, with
explain that a little bit. I don't know what you mean.
So PVC is not a very stable, you know, with heat and with cool, it expands and contracts more than wood. And
that affects the paint, or what's that affecting?
Gapping.
Everything. I mean, the joinery, the paint, your caulking, all of that stuff. So like I would think on the interior, if it weren't a moisture issue, that wood would just be not necessarily a fail-safe, but just a better...
More stable.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
And when you say when you're talking about PVC and your experience with it, is it like 1x PVC, like a 1x2 that's, you know, 3/4 by 1.5 inches?
No, I mean, I've done it even with decking and stuff like that, which is obviously outside. Some of that's been 1.5 inches. I've used a deck product with the nosing that, like, you really have to account for how much it expands and contracts. It just, like, as a product, expands and contracts more than wood does. Obviously, it's not moisture that's affecting it; it's temperature.
Right, seasonal.
I will examine that. We have not had any issues with that so far, but I haven't heard of that before. So, I'll.
I will say this was years ago, and I remember it being specified on a project on the interior, and I remember specifically they were specified as the window sills for these really deep window bucks, and it was only the sill that was called out to PVC, and I had asked the question as to why, and the reason at the time I was given was because you're only allowed to use a certain percentage of PVC on the interior of a home for health reasons. I don't know if that still stands. I don't know where that came from. It was a conversation, but that has always, we run into situations where, like, if we have maybe a basement when we're doing baseboard where we know that, hey, there could potentially be a moisture issue here. We might use PVC for the 1x, or in a garage, if there's a baseboard detail, we're going to use something that like PVC. But that's always kind of been in the back of my mind where in a home, I've never done the research, so it'd be interesting to kind of.
So it's like an off-gassing or something.
There's an off-gassing issue, yeah, and inside the home, and
you probably don't have to worry about it with his homes because he's got nothing else off-gassing. It's kind of nice.
just brick and a little PVC.
Little bit of PVC, good. You're way ahead of the curve.
Yeah.
So you've been thinking about like all the paint that you're putting in a normal house.
Thanks for helping me sleep better tonight.
Yeah. No, I was just curious as far as the PVC, if it was something that you guys had issues, or essentially brick is pervious.
So here's the deal. I mean, brick carries moisture.
Yeah.
And even when it's dry to the touch, that's why it's so important that we never have any wood to brick contact. We're always putting that ice and water shield type membrane between the wood and the brick.
Yeah.
Simply because that slight moisture in the brick, occasionally the wood is going to wick that out of it. And it's fine. It'll be fine for a few decades, but we want it to be fine for longer than that, right? Sure. So
there's tons of options out there too that don't have to be wood. I mean, if you had issues with PVC down the road, even like Boral or something like that would work inside.
Mm-hmm.
Which you can get milled into custom profiles too, which is pretty neat. It's a fly ash material.
Oh, man, Boral's so great about figuring out ways to use fly ash.
Yeah.
I feel like you've had
there's a company near us that basically makes all custom profiles now for all the old historic porches and stuff like that, where they'll kind of mimic the old moldings and make cutter heads to reproduce that stuff, basically not using mahogany or wood that's going to rot out.
Right. Boral's a pretty conscientious company. In the States, it's always between Boral and General Shell, who's the biggest. General Shell's owned by Wienerberger's, which is a global company, and is by far the largest brick manufacturing in the world, as far as I know. But I have a pretty good contact with Boral. A fellow named Santiago out of Atlanta, who would talk to me a lot about I actually participated in an event where they were experimenting with some new mortars that were, I want to say they were utilizing some fly ash even in the mortars. But and another thing, Boral, speaking about the carbon footprint of brick, Boral has some facilities that's using strictly methane to kiln their bricks. So methane from like landfills.
Mm-hmm.
So that's pretty interesting.
It's funny because like all my experience with Boral obviously is exterior building products and trim that's not brick.
Yeah. It's a good company. And actually all of the King brick that I was speaking of before is a Boral made brick, this off-market brick that I've been using here. And what's interesting here is we'll use maybe 4 or 5 different types of King brick. They're kind of in the same family, but just like I mentioned before when I was building that initial garden studio, we're just kind of hodgepodging this brick together, and it comes off like kind of a Cotswold English village type look. It's feels very uncontrived.
I was going to ask you, who's responsible for making sure that you don't have like consistent brick patterns or colors? Because even tile, they're like mix the boxes up. But like, whose jobs are like, all right, start mixing all the brick up. So I'm not pulling.
So the only thing I try to implement when it comes to using all of these different kinds of brick is just to avoid stratification. Like, don't all of a sudden, run out of this type and start using this type so that you have these stripes, these horizontal stripes going across the building. I don't mind if there's large bodies of this type and large bodies of that type, and just kind of integrate them a little bit. But the last thing I want is for us to go to a lot of trouble mixing them up, because that's kind of going against the whole idea of what we're about. So
going back to how we started this conversation, your involvement with this development, you're general contracting this from foundation to finishes and delivering it to the client?
Correct.
And also having a hands-on, or also being hands-on with the actual masonry.
Yes.
Are you doing projects outside of this development?
Not really. I mentioned in the past 3 years we had a pretty special project. I'd actually submitted plans to this chapel at a monastery just outside of Atlanta about 8 years ago.
Mm-hmm. When you say you submitted plans, did you do the plans?
Yeah, I'm the designer.
Well, I mean, we can't just breeze over that.
Just so casual.
Yeah, what do you mean I drew them?
Yeah. Every mason draws.
Well, when I say mason, I'm not using it loosely. I mean, there's bricklayers and there's not many masons left, to be really honest.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
Yeah. So,
are you designing all your homes too?
Yeah.
See, we had that question when we looked through the IG.
Yeah.
Some of those sketches are unreal. Yeah, we did.
Thank you. But remember the fine arts background. So
of course,
drawing a 2D straight line plan is compared to doing a portrait.
Yeah,
or something.
sure. I guess that it's when you, with all due respect, when you dumb it down like that, of course it's easier. But to make it, to be able to draw it, but also design something that is so, well thought out and well designed and speaks to what you're promoting. Not a lot of guys can take, design something, draw it, and execute it and deliver it as a complete product.
That's going back.
You're doing one. You're one person. It's typically a team.
That's the master builder. Remember, that's what Brent Hull said.
He's got it.
Is that master builders used to design it and build it.
So I'm pretty frequently asked, what I do or what my title is, and it's always kind of drawing a blank. Steve Mouzon is a new urbanist author. He wrote a book called Original Green, which I highly recommend to you guys.
It's called Original Green?
Original Green. It's a must. It really is. And Steve says I had this chat with him and he said, well, you're a master builder. And I said, well, yeah, I can't go around saying that though. So I'm just kind of, I'm a builder, my title's been hijacked by a bunch of guys who don't even own tools. And
right. How do you feel about that?
I'm not happy about it. The banks have had a role in that, and it's just silliness. How has a builder become someone who not only doesn't have tools, wouldn't know how to use them? It's
the same as custom and luxury.
Right.
Like all these words are just
luxury apartments.
Like, this is custom. No, it's not. It's the same as the 15 behind it.
Right.
And the next 15.
Or you built one.
Yeah.
And so now you're a custom home builder.
So another new urbanist, a guy named John Anderson, he's pretty fantastic. And he was speaking one day and he said, the problem isn't cookie cutter. The problem is bad cookies. Everybody loves cookies,
Damn.
It's not cookie cutters isn't the issue. The issue is that it's bad cookies. So
I haven't met a bad cookie yet.
What is your, so to speak to that and to, the issue that I'm going to speak for all of us that we have with, this generation shifting towards everyone being a builder and the craftsmanship, unfortunately, dying, right? And less, like you said, there's less masons and more bricklayers. What are you, if anything, what are you doing as an individual to help change that and shift that path?
Well, we have kind of a fledgling apprenticeship program, and I have 3 graduated apprentices that are now journeymen, and one is heading up a building program in a new urbanist village, new urbanist community in a jungle in Panama, a new urbanist jungle.
That took just such a turn.
Yeah,
I was like, I'm with you. I'm with you.
Down the road.
I lost you.
All right. So there's a new urbanist jungle village in Panama called Caluyala. All right. And one of my apprentices is there now heading up a building program himself. So he's a journeyman there teaching others how to build.
Mass wall construction.
They right now they're just timbering.
Okay.
They're harvesting in the area where they are. There was a lake, a hydroelectric dam lake built, back in the 60s maybe, and it flooded a lot of jungle. And there's a Canadian outfit there that's harvesting the submerged trees. Mm-hmm. And so they're doing a lot of, so we also do a lot of timber framing, and that's one of the things that I'm teaching the apprentices.
Okay.
So, but I am leaning into them pretty hard about, when are you going to start bringing brick into the mix down there? Because I actually visited a small facility that was manufacturing bricks in Panama, and it was pretty legit. The logistics are tough there, though. But another apprentice was just helping a cloister of nuns begin a new monastery in Pennsylvania, not far from Gettysburg. And then the third apprentice has stayed with me here in Carlton Landing and is on his 6th house right now, his 6th project solo. And if you could see this what he's doing, you would be astonished. Pull it up on Instagram. Pull it up on Instagram now. Whoa. It's maybe a dozen posts back.
And this is what, and this is this post as to what he's doing for you.
This is he's on his own. Okay. All right. It's 6, 9, 12.
I feel like New Urbanists is a band.
Might be.
It's the 23rd post back. Have a look at that new construction. This is by
Austin.
This is Austin. Yeah. This is a CPA. He's a 28-year-old CPA that decided he didn't want to be an accountant, had no construction experience, came and apprenticed with me for 2 years, and that's his 6th project in 3 years.
And
God, that's so sexy.
What's his role on this project?
He designed it and built it. I had nothing.
They exist.
I had nothing to do with it.
Oh,
nothing.
Goodness.
I had nothing. It's a block away from my house, and he's.
God, you got a hell of a block.
I mean, this is he's using a pretty amazing crew that we've all been using, but yeah.
Look at the base of that, how it builds out, and then
guys,
the corners.
We haven't tossed out, and if you guys are listening to this and waiting patiently for the end when we give out his Instagram, it's 1,000 Year House on Instagram.
Yeah. And we're on post September 18th.
And that's the number 1,000 Year House, no spaces, all lowercase. Yes. So this house has a 50-foot tower. It's facing a lake. So there's kind of a beach/farmhouse theme here in Oklahoma. So we're in the Midwest. So Seaside kind of ran with the beach motif, and we're running with a farmhouse motif, but because of the lake, there's a little bit of a beach theme mixed in with that. So you have the occasional tower with a house here.
I mean, it's incredible.
I'm crushing.
So is this a custom home or for sale?
Oh yeah, no, that's a custom home. That's a custom.
So how big is that house?
It's about, I want to say 3,000, 3,500 heated.
So is that that's over $1 million?
Yeah, it's 1.1.
And you use zip, huh?
Now, it's about 4,500 unheated. Okay.
The zip are just the window box, I believe, right?
Yeah, that's just the support for the arches.
Right. Yeah, we'll use zip board for the arches.
I mean, it's incredible. It's very cool.
Isn't that wonderful?
How many guys do you have working for you?
Well, I'm pretty solo. I have a couple of hands that I manage myself, but I try to sub out, like I said, as much as I can.
So is Austin under your company though?
Oh no, he's on his own.
So this is completely his like this wasn't. You have no financial tie to that home.
The apprenticeship program works like this. They sign on for a 2-year program, and with the promise of when they finish the program that they're going to go out and build this way. Okay.
Who came up with this program?
It was kind of forced on me by young guys that wanted to come and learn.
Okay.
It began with a young man named Patrick Lemon out of South Carolina, who I brought on board only because of his sheer persistence. Like, he just would not stop emailing me, calling me, and I finally said, I think I can take on a hand right now. So I brought him on, and it was really kind of my first real experience with millennials.
This is what they've been talking about.
And I became really intrigued with how enthusiastic he was, how much he wasn't buying the value system he had been sold his whole life. I said, and how much he was saying, this doesn't work for me. I'm gonna go my own way. This doesn't give me purpose. I don't find a sense of meaning in what you're telling me is meaningful. And at the end of the day, I want to be able to see that I've done something, And I mean, I have good friends that I've known for years that have told me a number of times what they do, and I still can't tell you right now what they do.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Well, we mentioned that a lot. It's that what we do is tangible.
Yeah. And so anyway, I realized, and I'd been wanting to do something like this, but it was still forced on me. So by this persistent young man, and I'm still fairly inundated with people reaching out. I'm interested in the apprentice program. What do I do next? So, and I'm going through some growing pains on how I absorb all of that, but we also have a great relationship with the Notre Dame School of Architecture, and have had 3 annual mass wall workshops with where they'll send down architecture students and they'll spend a couple of weeks with us laying brick. One year they sent down 5 guys, 5 girls, and in a 14-day period, they built one of our 800 square foot cottages from first brick to last brick.
Wow. 14 days?
I mean, in 14 days, they laid every brick. I made it a point not to pick up a trowel myself. I was only there coaching, and these kids built one of these houses. So yeah, so to answer your question, what are we doing in terms of
that? Answered the question.
Yeah.
You nailed it.
So the goal is not just to create a new way of building. The goal is to create a new kind of builder. as well.
Mm.
And I'm not saying that every building has to be this way. I'm just saying that at some point we need to have a category, a fraction of buildings within what we're doing that are going to carry us through time and represent us on the historic timeline. Because right now there's going to be a vacancy in a few hundred years if we don't start building at least some buildings that are going to last a very, very long time. You know what I mean? So
I think what you just said, it makes so much sense in that it's a new respect for the word builder. Like there's so many people that are out there doing it, but they don't have respect for what they're doing. They're doing it for a buck.
Right.
And you're doing it for what the purpose of a builder was.
Right.
It should be.
And looking and reflecting back at, thinking about why those brick buildings are still standing. Why are people renovating them? Why aren't they being torn down? Dude. Why did they work? What was the purpose of it? And digging into it. And I like that. Like there's such a heavy focus on building science and energy and all these products that are creating these membranes and all of those, as you said, now the word slips out of my mind, but all these chances of failure, right? Where you're using all these new products, you might be a guinea pig for it, whatever the case may be, where you went the other way. It's like, that's great. Like technology is evolving and this is a less expensive way to build, but you have all these opportunities for failure and the house is going to last 50 years. What about the buildings that are still standing that were built 400 years ago?
Dude, whenever you watch the Tour de France and they have these helicopters that fly over all these villages and they're like, yeah, that's like 400 years old. Show me one place in the U.S. that has that where
legit never watched the Tour de France.
Yeah, I was like, man, I'm really trying to relate to John right now, but
come on, man.
So what is it that allows us to build in such a way that buildings only last about as long as people last? What is it that
there's a lot of arguments there. I think a lot
that impugns that though. There's something very specific though that allows that provides impunity for building something that's only going to last about as long as a person.
I don't even know what the word impunity means.
So you're not held responsible. You're pardoned. You're not. You're not. Yeah, you're not going to have to suffer consequences.
I don't know if I have that. I don't know if I have that answer.
Do you remember from the Fine Whole Building Summit, the building inspector? He went through the building code in the beginning. Mm-hmm. Remember, it was like, if a house falls apart and kills someone, let's say it kills the husband, the father of the builder has to die. Or if the son, if the family member that lives in that house and the son dies, then that family puts the death of the son of the builder. That was the original build. Remember that?
Yeah, he was.
That was original code.
That was original code. That's how basic it was.
This guy probably put on one of the best
15-minute
explanations on what he was going to teach in building
and he had
class.
the code
and I was like,
highlighted.
Dude, I got to see this guy.
It was like highlighted, and he was like, "This was the original building code. Shall not what like."
I don't know.
It was something where it was basically like if you killed a family member in that house, it was an eye for an eye. So whoever built it, you put to death like their daughter if someone had died.
So is that what we're getting at? Is building code has evolved?
I didn't realize I'd been building to the original code my whole life. I'm not kidding. There's and I explain these to the apprentices. There's really 4 rules, guys. There's plumb, there's level, there's square, and there's soundness. Right? We can get to plumb, level, and square pretty readily, right? We understand that. How do we get to soundness if we're not an engineer? Well, we just overkill. We use common sense, and if we're not going to involve an engineer, we're just going to do it to where we know it's okay, and that's the way I built my whole life. But that's not always economically sound, but a lot of amazing things can happen in that extra mass. When you economize something to straight lines, there's not a lot of room for beautiful things to happen. And I really feel like that a lot of those builders we're seizing on the opportunity of self-preservation for their children, maybe. And at the same time saying, not only am I going to preserve my child's life, I'm also going to do this wonderful thing for God or whatever back in that time. That they might be on the top of a cathedral where someone can never see what they're doing, and they're doing some intricate little sculpture that that only God can see by their determination. So,
but what's so true is that when you're a true craftsman, I think, to get to what your question was, is like what changes. I think it's education. It's that, like, when I build a home, I'm not at any given time worried about the building code. I'm building the way I build, which is above whatever the minimum standard is. And so to get to that point, you have to have years of experience to be able to build and fine tune and get beyond a building code, which is a jumping off point, and into your own systems. Tyler doing his finished trim of the interior and all that stuff. There's no one dictating that to him.
Well, you guys have personal relationships with your inspectors, right? I mean, you guys know you're.
It's a love-hate.
Yeah, but I mean, usually, you're fairly familiar with them. They know that you know your stuff. They know that you're not. And what is code? Code is what's there to stop unreasonable people from doing unreasonable things.
Yes.
Yep.
It's a minimum.
When you build the way that we do, I mean, an inspector walks on my site once he knows me, and says, "Hey, how you doing?" And looks good. See you later. And he knows I have it, and that his job is not on the line because of something that he's missing that I'm doing wrong. He knows that I care enough to where he doesn't really have to worry too much about that. He's going to give it a glance, but not the same way he might do someone that he wasn't familiar with, Mm-hmm. And I would assume that you guys have experienced that before yourself to some degree, but yeah, that sense of the code being, it's simply there to stop silly people from doing silly things, and that's a good thing. Because it has to happen in broad brushstrokes, that causes that it can be aggravating sometimes. We have to jump through hoops we shouldn't have to jump through, but we do it because that's just the way the system works.
But I mean, I think when I grew up, you didn't know what the standard was to be upheld to. Meaning, you looked at the building code; it was the only thing in writing that put any parameters on what you were building.
Yeah, it's such a low bar.
Yeah, but you didn't. When I got into it, I was like, I got to do this. Like, I so nervous about hitting that benchmark that I was like, and it took me years to be like, what am I even doing? Like, why would I? But I'm just saying to a lot of guys out there, this podcast reaches the spectrum from people that do it for their entire life to people that are just starting into it, and you have to, and they have to price things a certain way. And when you're getting in the business and you're 2 years in, you're probably bidding the minimum. What you're doing, the work you're doing, the craftsmanship you're putting into it, it may be a lot, but it's probably still the minimum. And your goal should be to get above that minimum standard. Not so much, hey, we're all, you're building 4 houses at a time, and Nick's doing crazy stuff, and that's the kind of benchmark.
And be compensated for it.
Yeah.
To get above that minimum and be compensated for it.
Which is tough to do. And there's a lot of people out there, I think Ben said it the best, there's a lot of people out there right now building that you and I would never have in our houses.
Right.
And they're getting paid great money for it.
Sure.
It's scary when I look at it that way.
And they don't own any tools.
Do you ever think that one of the reasons why you build to your standard is because you live in the same community as the houses that you're building?
No, not at all. No, I've always built this way.
He's 5 feet from the next house.
Yeah.
It's like, you build my house, I have this issue, this issue, this issue.
Hey, I got the same one. Live with it. I do.
So I got myself through school I had a small scholarship, but I started building these hay barns and running sheds in my hometown. And that's how I got into building. And that eventually kind of evolved into building horse barns, and that got more and more intricate until I was doing these fairly elite type stables. And I started out, they were all carpentry based, but it was very frustrating for me when I'd come back a few years later after horses had been in these buildings, right? And they're, you have these 1,200 pound sweating, kicking, pissing animals. As beautiful as they are hard on wood, and they'll chew through a 2x6 just for fun because they're bored.
Yep.
And
I thought my dog was a pain in the butt.
Your dog's always asleep.
So I would come back to see these buildings that I'd kind of poured my heart into, that were carpentry themed, and the horses would have been pretty rough on them. And I've always thought of that as my kind of my experience with time, because putting a horse in a building is like speeding it through time. Does that make sense?
It's like putting a kindergartner in there.
Yeah. But like
1,200 pound kindergartner.
like putting a horse in there is like, you come back 3 years later and it's like you've come back 20 years later.
Sure.
Would you put a horse in your house that you build now?
Oh, yes. I mean, I wouldn't be happy about it.
We should do that. We should come visit you and we'll bring a horse.
I could see my wife saying, "This horse has got to go."
You start small. Get a mini horse first, or pony.
Yeah.
And then work your way up.
Right. But anyway, that's the reason that I started building in brick. I was so frustrated with the horses. And, I built some pretty elaborate solid masonry horse stables, very English styled, slate roofs, living quarters, all timber frame, all of the above.
So when you were building for the 1%, was it primarily the horse barns and things like that?
Well, yeah.
Did you get into residence?
But at some point, someone saw the horse barn and said, I want you to build a house for me like that. Mm-hmm. So I actually was having a conversation with someone who had wanted me to build their barn, and I wasn't available because I was working on this project. They'd been looking for someone to build their house for 2 years and couldn't find anyone. And they called me on a whim and said, well, we called you about our barn. What about our house? I said, well, I've never built a house before, but you can come look at this horse stable I just finished building. And I was 6 hours away, so they drove to come see it, and they got out of the car and started crying. So that's how that relationship.
Well, it was a bad drive.
Yeah, it was terrible. They're like, I can't believe we came all this way to see this.
No, 6 hours.
That was a bad playlist.
You're going to get back in the car and drive another 6.
Exactly. So, yeah, so I built my first house with that. That was a 3,500 square foot house. It was 170,000 bricks. It won a national architectural award and the BIA. So yeah, it took 2 years to build. It was quite the project.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like a lot of people try and control how their business is going to grow and adapt and where they want to be. But like starting by building sheds and small buildings to horse barns to custom homes to brick homes now, I feel like is not, I mean, maybe you imagined it that way. It seems like that's a kind of roundabout route to get there.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I was just, I was really just following my heart, just kind of carving out my own way.
That's crazy. I mean, that's an awesome story. I feel like a lot of people do put too much effort into trying to kind of make a plan, stick to that plan, and if it doesn't work, get so upset and down on themselves where it seems as if your path, while I'm sure there was a ton of deliberate moves and a ton of planning, and it wasn't just throwing stuff up in the wind and see where it lands, that where you ended up was not where you started all. I mean, even go back to a fine art degree. Yeah. It's neat to see where that path has led you and what it's taken you to and what you're doing now.
Yeah. I think it's it's really important for people to measure their success from, that distance they've traveled from where they've started,
Yeah. I
Yeah.
also think to repeat, it's like, I think it's super interesting that, you took the approach of really reevaluating how you were building and studying what has been done and what has been tried and true from the past, and doing it for the reason of, you said when you had kids, what were you going to do for them, and
Right.
to consider, the quote that's on your Instagram, that hits home for, I think, anyone that reads that, because those your commitment in there are multiple commitments that a lot of us are looking to just achieve one of them. And you're going after everything, building the best home that lasts the longest for an affordable price that brings true craftsmanship to it.
Right.
I mean, that's a huge commitment, but you understand how to get there, and I don't want to use simplistic in a negative way, but in a simple approach is just understand that the buildings that have been around for all this time, they work. Why can't we go back to that?
Exactly. And they didn't have heavy yellow equipment. I mean, we should be, why are we not building so much better than the people during the Renaissance? Mm-hmm. Look what was created in the Renaissance.
Right.
It's apex. Why is that the best? Why are we not creating the best right now?
Right.
Yeah, that's just bewildering to me,
I do have a random brick question, because I've been asked it a lot.
Ooh, what is it?
Painting brick on the exterior of a home.
I'm fond of it.
You're fond of it.
Yeah.
Anytime someone asks me what I think about painting, I'm going to say I'm fond of it.
I like it when it's done correctly. I guess, how do you do it? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, I mean, are there concerns with doing it?
Like what? Like it holds moisture, or
holds moisture, doesn't allow the brick to breathe. Moisture is going to pop the paint off. I mean, we just did a project, and we did.
He has a concern.
No, I don't have a concern with that.
I know a buddy that painted brick.
John, you lay up. No, we looked at a job, and that was one of the things on the drawings. She was like, "We want to whitewash because we hear your paint will peel off." And I was like, "Why?" She was like, "That's what the other builder told us." And I was like,
"Peace. I don't bid against other guys."
I guess the question would be, is there concern, and if there is, what is the right way to do it?
I haven't explored. I'm just putting my toe in the water on this myself.
Okay.
But the way that I'm doing it, I'm using a block filler as a primer first,
mm-hmm.
and then painting on top of that. Now, Austin Tennell, the guy who is building that big house that we looked at on Instagram, he's done a few other houses where he's put a lime wash on the houses.
Yeah.
And he's a big fan of it. I really don't care for it. I like it until it rains. When it rains, it becomes translucent, mm-hmm. and the house just looks soaking wet.
Yeah, understood.
And I just struggle so much with that. But as opposed to a house that is just opaquely painted,
right?
Which yeah, like I said, I quite like that. I like white brick with black metal roofs or slate. I think that can look really fantastic.
Yeah.
If you're going for a really high dollar house with a spec with a lot of curb appeal, I think that's the ticket right now.
Cool.
And I think it's fairly classic. I think that's not tied up in too much trend and fashion. I think that's always going to be fairly appealing, So
it's funny because I feel like I love old brick buildings and hate most new brick buildings.
Well, it's because the new brick buildings are the faces on the brick are so cosmetically they're affected, and the reason you don't like them is because they're trying to sell you a counterfeit, and you're allergic to it.
Yeah, I feel like they just look like a school.
And not only
Yeah.
that, but the smooth, like, to get an
too
entire
uniform.
wall, they're so refined that to get an entire wall perfectly flat, I mean, the moment the sun like in the morning, the sun passes across it, and you get the like, it's like tile lippage.
But it's an uneducated individual putting it together.
Absolutely.
Where you don't know. Like, I always said this example of when we go to trade shows, there's always applications that remove the skill. And this building went up in Natick Center. Anyone in from Natick will know exactly what I'm talking about. And they put this building up, and they put foam on the outside, and I was like, what are they doing? And then they put on a veneer.
Veneer.
It was like a snap and go.
Oh yeah.
Snap and go brick, and I was like, every day I drive by that, and I'm like, they struggled on putting up the signage. They struggled on putting up the lighting. They didn't know what to anchor it to, and I was like, serves you right. Like,
Drives by.
every day I'm like, I can't wait for this to fall apart.
Paint will be in a can pretty soon. I'm sure. You just paint it on, right?
So wild.
I did have an old brick fireplace in my house that they painted the brick red and then painted the mortar joints white.
Hold
Yeah.
on. Say that again. They painted the mortar what?
White.
The mortar joints white.
Yeah, that's
It was so weird.
Yeah. So there have been times that, I will, I have a pretty good relationship with General Shell as well. And sometimes they'll sponsor me on a brick or something, and they'll have some off market brick. And a lot of times when they're letting me look at a number of brick that might be available for me to use, I'll be looking at the back of the brick. And that's because I'm going to use the back of the brick as the face, because it's the closest thing to just a regular generic brick that I can find. So does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You're flipping the refined edge around.
Yeah.
That's cool.
And so if you can find a nice back, a lot of times you can't, because it'll have some sort of manufactured track marks on it, or it'll have a corrugated frog back, that's not usable. But sometimes you can come across something pretty good.
I mean, every brick chimney we did in the last 6 years, we used a brick from Worcester that was not a tumbled brick, but it was an antique brick, and people would just absolutely be in awe of, it had the tumbled look like it was worn or it was chipped off of an existing chimney.
Yeah.
With nothing square, nothing edgy to it, and people would always be in, I'm like, we didn't do anything special. We just bought the right brick.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, it had that contrast. Of course, we threw a couple of chevrons in the mix on some details, but man, people were just like, I don't know why I love this.
Yeah.
It's like, because it looks real. Like, it looks legit.
And when when it's not a wire cut brick, and it doesn't have all those brittle little points and edges, and that it's just softer on the eyes, when those tumbled brick like that. And that's just, all that's doing is emulating what time would have done to a regular brick,
My mason would put them in a like a little cement turner.
Mm-hmm.
He'd throw a couple brick in there at a time if they weren't tumbled enough, and he just turned it. And it was just a bunch of brick turning in it.
I did a post not too long ago that showed like 8 different brick lined up, and it started with a solid brick, and then it went with a frog brick, and it went and I just kind of put it up on a whim. It was something I was showing in a presentation. Man, I could not believe the stir that it created between Instagram and Facebook. Just showing how the brick is becoming more and more economized. And the question is always asked, will the consumer notice? And of course they're not going to notice a brick that's hollow. You can't see that it's hollow, but later down the road it becomes.
But on HGTV, it's just a peel and stick that goes up.
Paint on brick, right?
It's a pattern.
Yeah.
So, if anyone's interested in the apprenticeship program, is that something that is open to the public?
Yeah. I'm trying to figure
Asking
out
for a friend.
a good way to.
When do I start?
to vet that. One thing that I've come up with, we're gonna probably do a workshop,
Okay.
like a week-long workshop that people sign up for and will come and participate in. And in that time, they'll be immersed in the Hope for Architecture
Cool.
building principles, and we will build a small structure similar to the way
If you do, if someone's listening today and interested in learning more about that, where could they find more information, or how do they get in touch with you?
just reach out through Instagram would be fine. That
Awesome.
1,000-year house.
And that's 1,000 Year House.
Yeah. But
your website link on your Instagram is down.
Yeah, I know that. We used to be so attentive to that, and I used to have this really wonderful blog, and I just haven't had time these days. So I'm kind of treating Instagram as a mini blog,
As most are, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and I'm hoping to have the website revamped and up and running,
Cool.
Sometime relatively soon.
We have a running joke on our podcast that nobody's website is fully
Everyone's
functional or
working on their
complete. So my website's actually under construction. Almost every guest.
I don't understand, with all the spare time, why isn't it there?
Right.
Yep. Oh, well.
Well, with spare time aside, we do appreciate you making time tonight and hopping on the podcast. This was an amazing conversation, and I'm definitely going to rip my house down and build a mass masonry wall.
Well, hey, I appreciate you guys. I really do.
I'm bringing the mass.
Hey, and if after you kind of digest some of this, like I will, and maybe some other questions will come to mind, and I don't know, at some point, if you guys want to meet up again, I'd be happy to do another.
We're definitely meeting up.
Sure.
Next one's at your place.
I was going to say maybe in Oklahoma.
Come on over.
I'd love to see that
we'll
development.
We'll do it on the cheap. I'll find you some place to stay.
Fantastic.
Done.
That's awesome. Well, thanks again.
Well, thank you so much. Have a great evening.
Thank you, guys. Take care.
So that was an amazing conversation with Christian. I know someone. So I apologize. I meant to note this in the beginning, but someone had reached out to us and said, "Hey, you guys need to have this guy on the podcast." And so whoever that was, please DM us. Let us know.
It was a great
We'll
tip.
follow up. But that was a great suggestion. And he was, I literally texted him this morning. I'm like, hey, I know we've been chatting about this. Are you up for doing it tonight? And he was available. So that was great. I know we got a couple of new reviews from last week. I think it made up for the one that killed Johnny's buzz last week.
Standard chick?
What? Standard chick.
Love that.
Are we reading it?
Go ahead, man.
The guys never disappoint. Listen to every podcast to date, some multiple times, whether you're an established small business with a moderate workforce, someone who manages subs well, or stubborn and do every task yourself, you will appreciate this show.
She's calling you stubborn.
Oh, I wrote that review.
Oh, did you? Throw that in.
That one was me.
Throw that in with best in business guests, and you aren't missing anything in the show. Follow them on Instagram, as they also share their businesses and processes for a bonus. The only way it could be more powerful is if you combine Johnny's looks, Nick's metrosexual ensemble, and Tyler's height and tattoos. You will also hear about hockey.
Who is
Man,
this?
I read that first.
I know, right?
No,
I didn't see that coming.
Standard chick.
What's the name?
Standard chick.
Oh,
Thanks for the review this week.
Thanks for the love.
We get another one on Thursday from Stordal Construction.
Yeah, that's about what I would have came up with.
Thank you for creating this podcast. I enjoy hearing about the growth and success of each of your businesses as well as the guests. It's nice to know that we all face similar challenges and struggles as well as successes. Sorry, I'm late
with you.
apparently. Thank you for helping educate and making us all better builders. From Bryce Stordal. And if I said that wrong, I apologize. We got one more. Am I reading this one?
Troy. Yeah, I'm not reading anything. So
okay.
Good
Enjoy.
luck with that.
This one's from Troy Hiller. Enjoy listening to the three of you and guests. Great chemistry between the group. Listen to every episode. Their professional approach to the trade and the craft is a big inspiration. Can tell these guys understand the business on an entirely new level, and their ability to articulate the finest details of the construction trade sheds on entirely fondness for the craft.
Electrical engineer and DIY home guy.
Troy, appreciate that. I'm speaking for myself. I don't think that we know as much as we portray. I think we just curate a great conversation.
Yeah, we
know
know
Nick was going to say, I'm not metros. My style's not metrosexual.
Standard chick called me metrosexual. I'll agree with her. That's cool.
That's awesome.
No, but as always, guys, we appreciate the reviews. They're always fun to read, even the bad ones.
Yeah,
for some of us.
I kind of like the bad ones.
Yeah, they're funny. But you can find us on the web, themoderncraftsman.org. Email us at info@themoderncraftsman.org. And as always, ratings on iTunes and any of the podcast apps you guys are listening to.
Yeah, guys. Keep sharing it and keep hitting us up with content ideas. You guys shape this podcast.
If you guys need Nick on the weekends, he get a new phone that's just for the weekends. Number.
Take care, guys. Bye.
I haven't even gotten it yet. I'm not on that list.
Oh, wait. Hold on. We can't. This is how. So last week when Ryan was on, remember he had the keyboard in the background of his.
Yeah.
Like when he got up, there was an electric keyboard in the background.
Yeah.
He is not our first guest with an electric keyboard. That
we confirmed.
award goes to Mike Alion from ECS Homes the first time we had him on. He had a keyboard in the background.
And a deep V.
I confirmed it with him
after
last week's podcast. He's like, that's not my house. I was like, no, this isn't your house. But if I recall correctly, you had a keyboard. And he's like, you're right, I did. So maybe we'll get Ryan and Mike on for like a little duet
keyboard session. And I'm glad you stopped us from closing this out because we almost forgot to mention December 12th, Cape Cod Lumber in Randolph, Massachusetts. We're going to be there.
We will have Mike and Ryan there creating beautiful music, entry music.
I was like, what?
I was like,
wow, they confirmed? That's awesome.
Confirmed.
It'll be an intro.
We'll see you guys there.